Margaret Chen carefully examines the collection of antique photographs displayed on the velvet-lined table at the Riverside estate sale, her trained eye immediately drawn to a formal family dining photograph from 1902. As a senior appraiser for Hartwell Auction House in Philadelphia, she has developed an instinct for identifying valuable historical artifacts among the countless items that pass through estate sales throughout the region. The photograph shows the wealthy Morrison family gathered around their elaborate mahogany dining table in what appears to be their grand Victorian mansion. The image captures a moment of apparent domestic tranquility, with 5 family members posed formally around a lavishly set table laden with an impressive array of dishes, silverware, and crystal glassware that speaks to their considerable wealth and social status. At the head of the table sits the elderly patriarch, Thomas Morrison, a distinguished gentleman in his 70s who appears frail but alert, carefully positioned in an ornate wheelchair that suggests recent health difficulties. His younger wife, Helena, stands gracefully behind him with her hand resting protectively on his shoulder, while their 3 adult children, Robert, Catherine, and William, are arranged around the table in poses that suggest both formality and familial affection. The quality of the photograph is exceptional for 1902, with remarkable clarity that allows Margaret to observe minute details of the family's clothing, the room's elaborate decorations, and the impressive array of food displayed on the table. The photographer had clearly been skilled in his craft, using natural light from tall windows to illuminate the scene while maintaining sharp focus throughout the composition. Margaret's interest is piqued, not only by the photograph's technical quality, but also by the obvious wealth displayed in every aspect of the image. The Morrison family's dining room features expensive wallpaper, ornate furniture, and an elaborate crystal chandelier that would have been extremely costly in 1902. The table setting includes what appears to be fine china, sterling silver serving pieces, and crystal glasses that represent a significant financial investment. The Morrison estate, explains the sale coordinator, noticing Margaret's interest in the photograph, one of Pittsburgh's most prominent steel families. This was found in the attic with dozens of other family photographs, but this particular image was kept in a special protective frame, suggesting it held particular significance for the family. Margaret decides to purchase the photograph for further examination, sensing that it might contain historical value beyond its obvious artistic merit and family significance. Back at her Hartwell Auction House office, Margaret begins a systematic examination of the Morrison family photograph, using professional archival techniques and modern digital enhancement technology. Her initial assessment confirms her suspicion that this image represents more than a simple family dining scene, containing details that warrant closer investigation and historical research. Using high-resolution scanning equipment, Margaret creates a digital version of the photograph that allows for detailed examination of elements that would be invisible to casual observation. The enhanced image reveals subtle details about the family's expressions, body language, and the specific items arranged on their dining table that begin to suggest a more complex story than the photograph initially appears to tell. Margaret's examination of the family members' faces reveals interesting inconsistencies in their expressions and positioning. While most of the family appears relaxed and content, the elderly Thomas Morrison shows signs of obvious discomfort despite his formal pose. His eyes appear slightly unfocused, and his grip on his dining utensils seems weak and uncertain, suggesting possible illness or medication, effects that weren't immediately apparent in the original photograph. The digital enhancement also allows Margaret to examine the food arrangement on the table with unprecedented detail. The meal appears to be an elaborate Sunday dinner with multiple courses, including roasted meats, various vegetables, elaborate sauces, and what appears to be several types of wine and other beverages. However, she notices that Thomas Morrison's plate contains food that appears different from what the other family members are eating, with his portions seeming smaller and more carefully arranged. Margaret contacts Dr. James Patterson, a historian specializing in early 20th century American family life and dining customs at the University of Pennsylvania. She hopes his expertise can provide context about the photograph's historical significance and help her understand whether the Morrison family's wealth and lifestyle were typical for their era and social class. Dr. Patterson's initial response is enthusiastic, as he recognizes the Morrison name from his research into Pittsburgh's industrial families. The Morrisons were indeed one of Pittsburgh's wealthiest steel families, he explains. Thomas Morrison made his fortune in the steel industry during the 1880s and 1890s, but there were some unusual circumstances surrounding his death in 1903 that made the family somewhat notorious in Pittsburgh society circles. This information immediately captures Margaret's attention, as it suggests the 1902 photograph might have been taken during the final year of Thomas Morrison's life, potentially documenting important family dynamics during a crucial period in their history. Dr. Patterson's research into the Morrison family history reveals a complex story of wealth, family tension, and suspicious circumstances that immediately transforms Margaret's understanding of the seemingly innocent family dining photograph. His investigation uncovers newspaper archives, court records, and social correspondence that paint a disturbing picture of the family's final years together. Thomas Morrison had indeed accumulated vast wealth through his steel manufacturing business, creating one of Pittsburgh's largest family fortunes by 1900. However, his financial success had created significant family tensions, particularly regarding inheritance plans and the distribution of his assets among his wife and children. Contemporary newspaper accounts describe bitter disputes over Thomas's will and growing concerns about his mental competency in his final years. Dr. Patterson discovers that Thomas Morrison's health had begun declining rapidly in early 1902, around the time the family photograph was taken. Medical records from Presbyterian Hospital in Pittsburgh show that he had been treated repeatedly for stomach ailments, weakness, and neurological symptoms that doctors at the time attributed to old age and stress from business pressures. Most significantly, the historical investigation reveals that Thomas Morrison died in March 1903, under circumstances that prompted a coroner's investigation and widespread speculation in Pittsburgh society. The official cause of death was listed as gastric distress and general debility, but several physicians who had treated Morrison expressed concerns about the rapid progression of his symptoms and the unusual nature of his decline. Dr. Patterson's research uncovers correspondence between Thomas Morrison and his business attorney that reveals growing paranoia about his family's intentions regarding his wealth. In letters written during late 1902, Morrison expressed concerns that his younger wife and adult children were pressuring him to change his will and transfer control of his business interests to them before his death. The investigation also reveals that Helena Morrison, Thomas's second wife, whom he had married in 1895, stood to inherit the majority of his estate according to his existing will. His 3 children from his first marriage would receive smaller inheritances, creating obvious financial incentives for family members to either maintain good relationships with Thomas or potentially influence the timing and circumstances of his death. Perhaps most disturbing, Dr. Patterson discovers that the Morrison family had employed a live-in cook and several domestic servants during 1902. But these employees had been dismissed shortly before Thomas's death. Former servants later told investigators that they had been concerned about changes in the household routine in Thomas's declining health, but had been prevented from discussing their observations with outside parties. Intrigued by the historical context Dr. Patterson has provided, Margaret decides to conduct a more detailed analysis of the food visible in the 1902 photograph, using advanced digital enhancement techniques to examine the specific dishes and beverages arranged on the Morrison family's dining table. Her investigation takes an unexpected turn when she notices subtle but significant differences between the food on Thomas Morrison's plate and the meals being served to other family members, using specialized software designed for forensic image analysis. Margaret can distinguish individual ingredients and food preparations with remarkable clarity. The enhancement reveals that while the other family members appear to be eating similar portions of roasted meat, vegetables, and bread, Thomas Morrison's meal includes several items that appear to be prepared differently and served in smaller, more controlled portions. Margaret contacts Dr. Sarah Rodriguez, a food historian and toxicology expert at Johns Hopkins University, to help analyze the specific foods visible in the photograph and determine whether the differences she's observing might have historical or medical significance. Dr. Rodriguez's expertise in 19th and early 20th century cooking methods and food preservation techniques proves invaluable for understanding what the Morrison family was actually eating during this documented meal. Dr. Rodriguez's analysis of the enhanced image reveals several concerning details about Thomas Morrison's meal preparation. His food appears to include dark-colored sauces and seasonings that are not present on other family members' plates, and his beverages appear to be different from the wine and water being consumed by the rest of the family. These differences could indicate special dietary requirements due to his health conditions, but they could also suggest something more sinister. The food historian explains that in 1902, many common household substances could be used to poison someone gradually without immediate detection. Arsenic was readily available in many household products, including wallpaper, paint, and pest control substances. Dr. Rodriguez notes, it could be mixed into food or beverages in small amounts over time, causing symptoms that would appear to be natural illness or aging. Dr. Rodriguez's analysis also reveals that several of the items visible on Thomas Morrison's plate appear to have unusual coloration and texture that could indicate the presence of foreign substances. The enhanced image shows what appears to be a white, powdery residue on some of his food items that is not visible on the meals being consumed by other family members. Most significantly, the digital enhancement reveals that Helena Morrison appears to be handling serving utensils and food preparation in a way that suggests she was personally responsible for preparing or serving her husband's meal. Her positioning in the photograph and the serving pieces visible near her suggest she had direct control over what Thomas was eating during this documented family dinner. Dr. Rodriguez's preliminary analysis prompts Margaret to seek consultation with Dr. Michael Thompson, a forensic toxicologist and medical historian who specializes in analyzing historical poisoning cases. Dr. Thompson's expertise in 19th and early 20th century medical practices and toxicology proves crucial for understanding how the Morrison family's suspected poisoning scheme might have been carried out using methods available in 1902. Dr. Thompson reviews the enhanced photograph along with the historical medical records Dr. Patterson had discovered, immediately noting correlations between Thomas Morrison's documented symptoms and the effects of chronic arsenic poisoning. The symptoms described in his medical records, stomach ailments, weakness, neurological problems, are entirely consistent with gradual arsenic exposure over several months, he explains to Margaret and Dr. Rodriguez during their consultation. The forensic expert explains that arsenic poisoning was remarkably common in the early 1900s, both accidental and intentional, because the substance was widely available and its effects could easily be mistaken for natural illness or aging. Arsenic was used in everything from wallpaper dyes to medical treatments, making it easily accessible to anyone who wanted to use it for harmful purposes, Dr. Thompson notes. Dr. Thompson's analysis of the food visible in the photograph reveals several indicators that support the poisoning theory. The unusual coloration and texture of Thomas Morrison's food, combined with the white residue visible on several items, could indicate the presence of arsenic or other toxic substances that were commonly used for poisoning during that era. The medical expert also notes that the progression of Thomas Morrison's illness, as documented in hospital records, follows a pattern typical of chronic arsenic poisoning. His symptoms began gradually and worsened over time, with periods of apparent improvement followed by more severe episodes, a pattern that suggests regular exposure to poison rather than a single acute incident. Dr. Thompson explains that the family's dismissal of household servants shortly before Thomas's death could indicate an attempt to eliminate potential witnesses who might have observed unusual food preparation practices or noticed symptoms of poisoning. Domestic servants were often the first to notice when something was wrong in wealthy households because they were responsible for food preparation and had intimate knowledge of family routines, he observes. Most significantly, Dr. Thompson's Aozeka review of contemporary medical knowledge reveals that doctors in 1902 would not have routinely tested for arsenic poisoning unless they had specific reasons for suspicion. The Morrison family's wealth and social status would have made accusations of poisoning seem unlikely to medical professionals, allowing a carefully planned poisoning scheme to proceed without detection. The forensic analysis suggests that the 1902 family photograph may have inadvertently documented evidence of an ongoing murder plot, capturing visual proof of the methods being used to slowly kill Thomas Morrison for his inheritance. With mounting evidence suggesting that the Morrison family photograph documents a murder in progress, Margaret contacts Detective Lieutenant Sarah Walsh of the Philadelphia Police Department's Cold Case Unit to discuss the possibility of reopening the Thomas Morrison death investigation as a potential homicide case. Despite the passage of over a century, Detective Walsh is intrigued by the unique evidence presented by the photograph and the expert analysis supporting the poisoning theory. Debt. Walsh explains that while the case is far too old for criminal prosecution, the evidence could potentially support a historical investigation that might provide closure for descendants of the Morrison family and contribute to academic understanding of early 20th century crime patterns. She agrees to review the available evidence and coordinate with Pittsburgh authorities to examine any surviving records from the original coroner's investigation. The detective's research into Pittsburgh police archives reveals that the Morrison death had indeed been investigated more thoroughly than contemporary newspaper accounts suggested. Police reports from 1903 show that several family members and former servants had been questioned about Thomas Morrison's final months, and investigators had noted several suspicious circumstances surrounding his death. Debt. Walsh discovers that the original investigation had been closed after pressure from influential Pittsburgh families who were concerned about scandal affecting their own reputations and business relationships. The Morrison family's wealth and social connections had effectively protected them from serious scrutiny, despite evidence that might have supported criminal charges under different circumstances. The detective's investigation also reveals that Helena Morrison had remarried within 18 months of her husband's death, an unusually short mourning period for wealthy widows in that era. Her new husband was reportedly a business associate of the Morrison Steel Company who had gained control of significant family assets through his marriage to Helena, suggesting possible conspiracy in Thomas's death, most significantly, debt. Walsh's research uncovers evidence that 2 of Thomas Morrison's children from his first marriage had contested their stepmother's inheritance in court, claiming that their father had been mentally incompetent during his final months and that Helena had exercised undue influence over his financial decisions. While these lawsuits were ultimately unsuccessful, they suggest that family members had suspected wrongdoing even at the time of Thomas's death. The detective's investigation reveals that several former Morrison household employees had provided statements to investigators expressing concerns about Thomas's treatment during his final months. These servants described changes in household routines, restrictions on Thomas's interactions with outside visitors, and Helena's unusual involvement in food preparation, all consistent with a deliberate poisoning scheme. Det. Walsh concludes that while criminal prosecution is impossible after more than a century, the evidence strongly supports the conclusion that Thomas Morrison was murdered by his family members who wanted to accelerate their inheritance of his wealth. D. Walsh's investigation into surviving Pittsburgh court records reveals a complex web of family deception and financial manipulation that extends far beyond the suspected poisoning of Thomas Morrison. Her research uncovers evidence of systematic fraud, forgery, and conspiracy involving multiple family members who worked together to steal and conceal assets worth millions of dollars in early 1900s currency. The detective discovers that Helena Morrison had been forging her husband's signature on business documents and financial transactions for several months before his death, transferring ownership of steel company assets to shell companies controlled by her relatives and associates. These transactions, hidden from Thomas and his children, effectively stole much of the family fortune while Thomas was still alive but incapacitated by poisoning. Court records show that Robert, Catherine, and William Morrison, Thomas's children, from his first marriage, had initially cooperated with Helena's schemes in exchange for promises of larger inheritances than they would have received under their father's original will. However, after Thomas's death, Helena reneged on these agreements, and the children found themselves largely disinherited despite their participation in the murder plot. Det. Walsh's investigation reveals that the Morrison family had employed Dr. James Crawford, a disreputable physician known for providing medical services to Pittsburgh's criminal underworld, to treat Thomas during his final months. Dr. Crawford's medical records, discovered in Pittsburgh medical archives, show that he had prescribed various medications and treatments that would have masked the symptoms of arsenic poisoning while accelerating Thomas's decline. The detective uncovers evidence that the Morrison family had been planning Thomas's murder for over a year before his death, with Helena gradually assuming control of household management and isolating Thomas from business associates and family friends who might have noticed his deteriorating condition. Former servants described a pattern of visitors being turned away and Thomas being confined to his room for increasingly long periods. Det. Walsh discovers that the family had also been systematically destroying evidence of their crimes, burning business records, disposing of household items, and dismissing servants who might have witnessed suspicious activities. The 1902 family photograph appears to be one of the few pieces of evidence that survived this comprehensive cover-up attempt. Most significantly, the investigation reveals that Helena Morrison and her confederates had made detailed plans for disposing of Thomas's body in a way that would prevent detection of poisoning. They had arranged for immediate cremation rather than traditional burial, and had bribed the attending physician to sign a death certificate without conducting a thorough examination or autopsy. The detective's research shows that the Morrison murder plot was far more sophisticated and premeditated than a simple poisoning scheme involving financial fraud, medical conspiracy, and systematic evidence destruction that demonstrated remarkable criminal planning and coordination. As the investigation progresses, Margaret and her team of experts conduct an even more detailed analysis of the 1902 Morrison family photograph, using advanced forensic imaging techniques to reveal hidden details that provide crucial evidence about the family's criminal activities. Their examination uncovers subtle visual clues that the perpetrators had probably never realized they were documenting for posterity. The enhanced analysis reveals that several family members are positioned in ways that suggest they are actively concealing evidence of their crimes. Helena Morrison's hand placement and body language indicate she is partially obscuring items on the table that might have revealed the true nature of Thomas's special meal preparation, while her children are positioned to block certain angles of view that might have shown incriminating details. Margaret's team discovers that the photograph contains reflections in various glass and metal surfaces that reveal additional people present during the meal who are not visible in the main composition. These reflections appear to show Dr. Crawford and possibly other conspirators who were observing the family dinner to ensure their poisoning scheme was proceeding according to plan. The forensic analysis also reveals that several items visible in the photograph had been deliberately arranged to appear innocent while actually serving criminal purposes. What initially appeared to be decorative serving pieces actually include containers for poison, specialized utensils for administering toxic substances, and concealed medical equipment for monitoring Thomas's condition during the meal. Most remarkably, the enhanced imaging reveals that Thomas Morrison's eyes show signs of pupil dilation and other physical symptoms consistent with acute arsenic exposure occurring at the time the photograph was taken. His facial expression, when examined closely, shows subtle signs of distress and confusion that suggest he was actively being poisoned during this documented family dinner. Margaret's analysis also uncovers evidence that the photograph itself was staged specifically to create a false record of family harmony and Thomas's apparent good health. The formal poses, elaborate food preparation, and careful lighting suggest this was not a spontaneous family meal, but rather a calculated attempt to document Thomas's supposed well-being for potential legal purposes. The team discovers that the photographer who took this image, Heinrich Müller, had been paid an unusually large sum for what should have been a routine family portrait. Müller's business records, found in Pittsburgh Historical Archives, show that the Morrison family session had been scheduled at unusual hours and had required special equipment and multiple attempts to achieve the desired result. Perhaps most significantly, the enhanced analysis reveals handwriting visible on papers, partially concealed under table settings, that appear to be notes about poison dosages and timing. These documents, barely visible in the original photograph, but clear under digital enhancement, provide written evidence of the family's murder plot captured inadvertently by their own photographer. DA. Walsh's investigation culminates with the discovery of additional evidence that reveals the long-term consequences of the Morrison family's crimes and their impact on subsequent generations. Her research uncovers a pattern of continued criminal behavior, family dysfunction, and ultimate justice that extends well beyond Thomas Morrison's murder in 1903. The detective's research reveals that Helena Morrison's second marriage ended in scandal when her new husband died under suspicious circumstances in 1908, with symptoms remarkably similar to those that had killed Thomas Morrison. Pittsburgh police investigated the second death more thoroughly, but Helena had fled the city before charges could be filed, taking stolen Morrison assets with her to California. Debt. Walsh discovers that the Morrison children's participation in their father's murder ultimately destroyed their own lives through guilt, paranoia, and continued criminal behavior. Robert Morrison died in 1915 from what appears to have been suicide, leaving behind letters expressing remorse for his role in Thomas's death. Catherine Morrison became a recluse who spent her inheritance on alcohol and died impoverished in 1920. William Morrison, the youngest of Thomas's children, attempted to build a legitimate life, but was eventually arrested for fraud in 1925 when he tried to claim additional inheritance money using forged documents related to his father's estate. His trial revealed many details about the family's crimes that had been successfully concealed for over 2 decades. The investigation uncovers evidence that several other Pittsburgh families had been victims of similar schemes involving Helena, Morrison and her associates, suggesting that the Morrison murder was part of a broader pattern of criminal activity targeting wealthy elderly men throughout the region. At least 3 other suspicious deaths had connections to Helena's social circle and showed similar patterns of gradual poisoning and inheritance theft. Walsh's research reveals that the Morrison Steel Company, depleted by years of fraud and theft, eventually collapsed during the 1907 financial panic, destroying the livelihoods of hundreds of workers and investors who had depended on the business that Thomas Morrison had built through legitimate means. The family's crimes had consequences far beyond their immediate victims. Most significantly, the detective discovers that modern forensic techniques have enabled the identification of arsenic residue in hair samples from Thomas Morrison's preserved personal effects, providing definitive scientific proof that he was indeed murdered by arsenic poisoning. This evidence, combined with the photographic documentation and historical records, establishes beyond doubt that the Morrison family photograph documents an active murder plot. The investigation concludes with the understanding that the 1902 family photograph represents one of the most unusual pieces of evidence in criminal history, a document that inadvertently captured visual proof of a murder in progress while the perpetrators believed they were creating evidence of their innocence. Margaret's investigation concludes with a comprehensive exhibition at the Philadelphia Museum of American History titled Hidden Crimes: Photography as Evidence in Historical Cases. The Morrison family photograph serves as the centerpiece of this groundbreaking exhibition that explores how modern forensic techniques can reveal historical crimes that escape justice in their own time. The exhibition presents the complete Morrison case alongside detailed explanations of the forensic analysis techniques used to uncover evidence of the poisoning plot. Visitors can examine high-resolution displays showing the enhanced photograph, details that revealed the family's criminal activities, providing a unique educational experience about both historical crime and modern investigative methods. Dr. Patterson, Dr. Rodriguez, Dr. Thompson, and Det. Walsh contributes scholarly articles to an academic publication documenting the Morrison case and its significance for historical research and forensic science. Their collaborative work establishes new standards for analyzing historical photographs as potential crime scene evidence and provides methodologies for similar investigations. The exhibition attracts significant attention from genealogical societies and family history researchers, leading to the discovery of several other suspicious historical photographs that contain potential evidence of crimes. Margaret's investigative techniques inspire a new field of historical forensic analysis that combines traditional archival research with modern scientific methods. Working with Pittsburgh historical societies, the team arranges for a proper memorial marker for Thomas Morrison at Allegheny Cemetery, where his remains were eventually interred after his family's cremation plans were disrupted by the initial police investigation. The marker acknowledges him as a victim of murder and honors his contributions to Pittsburgh's industrial development. The Morrison case becomes a landmark example of how historical injustices can be addressed through modern investigative techniques, even when legal prosecution is no longer possible. The case provides closure for Morrison family descendants who had suspected wrongdoing but lacked evidence to support their suspicions. Helena Morrison, who had fled to California in 1908, was eventually tracked by debt. Walsh's researched to Los Angeles, where she died in 1920 under an assumed name. Her death certificate lists the cause as gastric distress, possibly indicating that her own criminal associates had ultimately used her preferred murder method against her. The Morrison family photograph is permanently displayed in the museum's forensic history collection, properly identified as documentation of a murder plot that was successfully concealed for over a century. A detailed placard explains the case and the investigative techniques that revealed the truth, serving as both historical documentation and a reminder that modern science can bring justice to historical crimes. Margaret continues her work as a forensic historical investigator, using the techniques developed during the Morrison case to examine other suspicious historical photographs and documents. Her pioneering work establishes Philadelphia as a center for historical crime investigation and helps resolve dozens of cold cases that had remained unsolved for decades or centuries. The Morrison case demonstrates that even the most carefully planned crimes can be exposed by modern investigative techniques, and that family photographs intended to conceal guilt can ultimately serve as evidence that brings truth to light and justice to victims who were denied it in their own time.